Hello, family, and welcome. We're Bob and Penny Lord. There are saints among us whose greatest virtues have been their lifelong battles against their human nature. We have a tendency to ignore what we believe to be their shortcomings in an effort to go directly to their sanctification. When we do this, we miss a teaching the Lord has to give us. We go for the dream and we miss the journey. We would miss Saint Bernadette, the visionary of Lourdes.
Bernadette never considered herself too good or too worthy. If anything, it was just the other way round. The little saint of Lourdes was given many gifts in her lifetime. One was beholding the presence of Mary, the Mother of God, 18 times in the year 1858. Another was the ecstasy she experienced during these apparitions. She prayed the gifts would offset her imperfections, a strong will, a fiery temper, a stinging tongue. What she may never have realized is how our Lord Jesus and his Mother Mary would use these traits for his glory.
We once wrote that Bernadette was a simple girl and illiterate at the time Our Lady appeared to her, but never did we consider her a stupid girl. Her behavior throughout the period of the apparitions, and it was a strong indicator of this, and her life after the apparitions and in the convent of San Gildard is further proof of her strength. Bernadette was never overly impressed with herself or her role in the apparitions at Lourdes. She truly believed the reason Mary chose her was because she was the lowest of the low. She once said, "Don't I realize that the Blessed Virgin chose me because I was the most ignorant? If she could have found anyone more ignorant than myself, she would have chosen her."
By the world's standards, everything in Bernadette's early life would indicate that she was the bottom of the barrel. Her family was so poor that they brought the poverty level of the area down to a new low. Her father hired out for wages just under what was paid for a workhorse. At the time of the apparitions, they had been reduced to living in a former prison cell, the cachot, which had been condemned for being below human standards.
They lived here from 1857 until the end of 1858, just at the time when the apparitions took place. Right after the year after the apparitions, they left here. The family were bankrupt when they left the bowling mill where she was born, although they had lived there comfortably until 1855. Then they went down deeper and deeper into misery, continually moving from one place to another. When they arrived here, they were going through the most painful time they had ever experienced. There were 6 of them, I'm sorry. 6. Francois and Louise, the mother and father, and the 4 children. Bernadette, the oldest, Toinette, Jean-Marie, and Justine. All in this room. There was a table, a few chairs, a trunk where the linen was kept, 2 beds. One on the right as you enter, and the other on the same side but near the fireplace. And this was where they cooked. In this utter poverty, the Subaru bore the hardships together. Their mutual love united and strengthened the family. As I said, the cousin who lived upstairs, André Sajou, bore testimony that there was never a dispute, no arguments between the parents or between the parents and the children. In the evening, they prayed together. And on the 11th of February, it had just rained. The weather was miserable. It was cloudy. It was very cold. There had been a snowstorm about 2 weeks before. Bernadette left this room, went down to the grotto of Massabielle to pick up dry sticks for the fireplace because they could not afford wood. And that's where Our Lady appeared to her, and she would never be the same.
Now, scientifically, they tell us, and they've done experiments with rats, you know. You put people, they would take rats, and they put them in tighter, closer quarters, and they will eventually kill one another. And yet, this family of 6 came into an uninhabitable area, an area that was not fit for the worst criminals under the worst conditions, and they loved one another. She was a sickly girl from birth. She suffered asthma all her life. She was undernourished as a result of the family's living conditions.
She was sent to a farm in Batre to live with the woman who had breastfed her when she was a child. She was promised she would be able to study for her first Holy Communion with the local priest. She was almost 14 at the time and the only girl of her age in Lourdes who had not received First Holy Communion. No sooner had she arrived in Batre than the priest left to enter the monastery. Her foster mother tried to teach Bernadette catechism, but she couldn't speak French very well, and Bernadette not at all. In addition, the lessons had to wait until after dinner was over and all the chores had been completed. Bernadette had a problem retaining information under normal conditions, but the fact that she was exhausted when the lessons began turned it into a disaster. Bernadette was extremely frustrated. She told her foster mother she had to go into Lourdes one Sunday. When she arrived at the cachot, she confronted her family, insisting she be allowed to return home. She wanted to receive her First Holy Communion and would have to begin her lessons at once if she would receive in 1858.
She returned to Lourdes on January the 28th, 1858, 2 weeks to the day before Our Lady appeared to her. Now let's consider why Mary came to Bernadette with this particular message. Pope Pius IX, 4 years before, who had a great love and devotion to Mary, had proclaimed her immaculate conception. And this caused a furor that had not yet died down. By this dogma, Catholics were required to believe that Mary was conceived without sin. There was a popular heresy rampant in Europe at that time. It was called pantheism, which claimed that man was equal with God. By the proclamation of the Immaculate Conception, Jesus, through his Pope, declared that no mortal was equal with God. In fact, with the exception of Jesus, only Mary was conceived without original sin. This caused more problems than it meant to solve. Rumbling went on inside the church and outside as well. It was outrageous to give this single honor to a woman, they argued. By Mary's statement to Bernadette, "I am the Immaculate Conception," she not only confirmed the Pope's dogma, but denied the heresy of pantheism from heaven itself. So you can see how important an apparition this was. Mary could not possibly have entrusted it to someone who didn't have the strength to affirm it. Bernadette had the strength that Mary needed.
On February 11th, Bernadette went with a sister and a friend to pick up dry twigs at the grotto of Massabielle. The Bernadette who walked out the door of the jail that day would never return. She was to be touched by Our Lady and would never be the same. On that day, heaven and earth met, and the world was affected for all time.
Bernadette and her sister Toinette frolicked through the town, picking up a playmate, Jean Abadie, on the way. They passed through the old fort and then went down towards the center of town. The chore was to pick up firewood wherever they could find it. The little girls wound their way through the town, then down the hill in the direction of the river Gave.
They approached the river. They saw a cave on the other side. It was the grotto of Massabielle, a garbage dump. But it was dry inside. They could see twigs and sticks on the ground. Bernadette hesitated to cross the river for fear she would catch cold. But then the other girls chided her. She took off her stockings and began to wade across the water.
At the same time, a streak of light flashed through the sky. We don't know if the other children saw it, but as Bernadette walked out of the water, she was thrown to her knees by an unknown force. Before her was a brilliance that was indescribable, dazzling, yet there was a softness, a warmth, a shimmering, but oh, so much more.
Bernadette looked to an alcove to the right of the grotto. She was speechless. There must have been a choir of angels reaching as high a pitch as the eyes of Bernadette and the lady met. An electric beam riveted the gaze of the two together. Bernadette could feel her heart swelling. She was afraid it was going to burst.
She couldn't breathe. She trembled, but her fear turned into excitement, wonderment. She couldn't take her eyes off the lady. It had begun. The Queen of Heaven had come down to speak to her people. God had put aside the laws of nature and created miracle.
This was the beginning of 18 apparitions that Our Lady made to Bernadette in the year 1858. There were many messages of great importance Our Lady gave us through Bernadette, and many messages for Bernadette herself.
The most meaningful message for Bernadette came on the third apparition. Actually, the first time Our Lady spoke to her, when she asked her, "Would you have the grace to come here every day for 2 weeks?" And then she said to her, "I do not promise to make you happy in this world, but in the next."
For us, the people of God, perhaps the most important apparition was the one which took place on Thursday, February 25th. It was at that time that Our Lady said, "Penance, penance, penance." She kept repeating penance to the people. Then she said to Bernadette, "Go and drink at the fountain and wash yourself. Go and eat the grass which is there. Kiss the ground in penance for sinners."
Well, Bernadette didn't know what she was talking about. She kept looking around the grotto for a spring to drink water from. At first, she thought the lady meant the mill stream, and then she went running towards it. Our Lady said, "No, that's not it." Then Bernadette headed for the River Gave. Our Lady said, "No, that's not it." Bernadette whirled around in the grotto. She was confused. Then Our Lady repeated the request and then said, "Go and eat grass, which is yonder." Bernadette went over to a clump of grass that was in the grotto. She picked it up and began to chew it. It tasted bitter, but it was okay. She was doing what the lady wanted.
And then she looked for water, and she couldn't find a spring anywhere. She saw a wet spot on the ground. She went over to it, and she thought it was probably the remainder of a flood that had been there. She started digging and digging. She finally came up with a little bit of water, and she washed her face in the water. It was mud. She was washing her face in mud. And then she dug some more, like a little squirrel. And finally she got enough water to cup in her hands, and she tried to drink it. But it mixed with the mud, and she choked on the mud and the water, and she threw it up.
Her mother was angry, and the people thought Bernadette had lost her mind. The mother took her away angrily, but as she left, everyone's attention was focused on Bernadette. Nobody noticed the little pool that was forming from where Bernadette had dug. And that pool began to trickle and grow and grow and grow, and from a pond it became the miraculous baths that we go to today. The baths that have been running since 1858 continuously and show no sign of letting up.
Our Lady told Bernadette to go to the priests and ask for a chapel to be built. So she went to her parish priest, Abbé Péramal. The first time she attempted to speak to him, he received her politely until he heard her request. He proceeded to fly into a rage, accusing her of lying, of being a lunatic, and trying to disrupt the little peaceful hamlet. When she left him, Bernadette was visibly shaken. But when Mary asked her again to go to the priests to ask for a chapel to be built, and especially for people to come in procession, she knew she had to confront the dreaded Abbé Péramal again. She was frightened, but this was what the lady wanted, and this was what she would do. However, this time she brought backup with her. She asked her aunts to accompany her. She did not want to be alone with the priest.
She just got to him the first part of her message when he went through the ceiling again. The barrage was so great she stood riveted to the floor, petrified. The aunts were speechless. After the tirade, they left the rectory. As they were hurrying away, Bernadette recalled she had not given him the second part of the message. She had to return. Her aunts thought she had really lost her mind this time. They would have no part in going back to that priest. So Bernadette asked another woman to accompany her that evening to the priest, to give him the second part of the message about building a chapel. But in an effort to claim and to kind of calm this priest down, she said meekly, "It doesn't have to be a big chapel."
The turning point for Abbé Péramal came a month after the apparitions had ended. On Tuesday, March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, actually 3 weeks after the official apparitions ended, Bernadette woke up like a shot in the middle of the night. She knew Our Lady was calling her to the grotto, and so she went down immediately. When she got there, Our Lady was waiting for her. She went into her special spot, knelt down, and began to pray and talk to the lady. Her parish priest had asked her to ask Our Lady who she was, what was her identity. She asked Our Lady over the period of the apparitions, but Our Lady would just smile. This time she asked again. 3 times she asked the lady who she was, and 3 times Our Lady smiled.
And then on the 4th time, in Bernadette's own words, Aquero, the dear one, drew apart her clasped hands and let both her arms hang down. Then she put her hands together again at the level of her breast, lifted her eyes towards heaven, and said, I am the Immaculate Conception. The cycle was completed. A miracle that had occurred before the beginning of time, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, passed down through the years as tradition, proclaimed on earth by Pope Pius IX in 1854, was confirmed by heaven in 1858 in this little grotto, nestled deep in the Pyrenees, in a hamlet of no consequences, to this chosen saint who had no idea what the words of the lady meant. Bernadette rushed to the parish church after the lady left her, repeating the words over and over again so she wouldn't forget them. When she arrived, a huge crowd had followed closely behind her, and they were waiting outside the door of the priest's house as she went in. Abbe Peyramal stared at the child, who was completely out of breath. She repeated the words, I am the Immaculate Conception. What do you mean, he asked. That's who she is. She told me. I am the Immaculate Conception. The priest could feel a lump form in his throat. His eyes began to well up in tears. He tried desperately to control himself. Do you know what that means? He asked. Non, mon curé, she answered, her eyes as big as saucers. He was convinced. This man who struck the greatest fear into Bernadette's heart became her greatest defender and supporter, using the same fiery temper against her attackers as he had leveled against her. This little girl had to be wise, firm, discerning, and extremely brave to stand up to all the people who would try to dissuade her, including priests, bishops, police chiefs, prosecutors, and on and on. Her interrogations went on for hours, sometimes full days. Her questioners constantly tried to trip her up, make her contradict her statements. The interviews were invariably high-pitched, full of tension. She was always on her guard, knowing they did not want the truth but to discredit her. No one was on her side. All were against her. Now let's think a moment about Bernadette's situation throughout the time of the apparitions, and actually for her entire life. We have to remember that she was all alone. She had no support system. Bernadette's only strength was that given to her by Mary, but it was enough for her.
As time passed and the grotto and the apparitions came to be more accepted by the church and the government, it became increasingly clear to Bernadette that she could not remain in Lourdes much longer. Bernadette could see the beginning of the pilgrimages starting when she was still there. She knew that she must decrease while the message of Jesus through Mary increased. She also knew that the only way this could happen was to sacrifice her beloved grotto of Massabielle.
St. Bernadette left Lourdes in 1866 for the convent of St. Gildard, some 600 miles to the north. Mary's prediction to Bernadette followed her all her life. I cannot promise you happiness in this world, but in the next. Victor Hugo, a French novelist and playwright of the 19th century, summed it up well. He said, Our Lady asked Bernadette to eat bitter herbs and drink muddy water, and this was to be the pattern of her life. She bore it well, not only during the time of the apparitions, but also for the 13 years she spent in the convent of St. Gildard.
She was loved by all except one. Mother Thérèse Vazou was Bernadette's mistress of novices when she entered the convent of Saint Gildard in Nevers. She later became the superior of the community and was the cause of most of Bernadette's spiritual suffering in the convent. This nun mistreated her almost from the day she arrived. After the death of the little seer, Mother Therese blocked the process of beatification from being opened until after her own death.
When Bernadette came here, she said that this statue of our Blessed Mother most closely resembled the lady who appeared to her at the grotto in Lourdes. And we also read in her writings that she spent time, especially those first few days. Oh, Lord, what must it have been like?
She was so lonely here. She was completely separated from everything she had ever known. All the people here were strange to her. The only thing she had was this statue of Our Lady, which could bring her back to her beloved Lourdes. She had a lot of consolation here, not only those first few days, but almost every night when she was well, she would come and visit Our Lady here and pray.
And for her, this was Our Lady of Lourdes. Although her heart was still with that lady and the grotto, she loved the grotto. And with her beloved family, here when she came, she was rejected, she was suspect, judged, and she missed the love of her family. She missed the memories of the grotto. So when she came here to this little grotto, she was once again with her lady, and she could unburden all her sorrows to the lady, to this lady, Our Lady of the Waters and Our Lady of the Smile.
And Our Lady of Lourdes.
She worked in the infirmary, which was one of her best loved jobs. She brought joy wherever she went. She never took herself too seriously. She took her journey very seriously, the special gift she was given by Mary. She knew she was specially chosen, and that called for a certain behavior on her part. She spent the rest of her life trying to live up to that calling. Though her life was filled with emotional and spiritual, as well as physical suffering, she maintained a most unusual sense of humor. She was one of the girls. When incoming novices got to know her, she had the freedom to joke and cut up better than the rest of them.
Bernadette's illness became worse during her years in Nevers. Many of her sister nuns suggested she go to the baths at Lourdes. Bernadette's reply was, "I have made the sacrifice of never seeing Lourdes again. I have only one ambition, that of seeing the Blessed Virgin Mary glorified and loved."
Bernadette had always suffered physical pain, so she was used to it. But it was nothing compared to that which she suffered during the last days of her life. Her body racked with pain, her back almost raw from bed sores, her tubercular leg swollen. It was so huge it was grotesque. She developed abscesses in her ears, which made her partially deaf for a time. It was this time she suffered most greatly in her soul. It was Bernadette's dark night of the soul. She went through her nights fighting great battles with the devil. Hers was not a lack of faith in her God, but a guilt for not having given back to God in proportion to the gifts she had been given during her lifetime. She believed she had been specially chosen, but she was tortured because she judged that she had not lived up to that honor. She prayed desperately for forgiveness. During her final walk to the Father, she carried a heavy burden, and as she had done all her life, she walked alone.
After many false alarms going as far back as 1866, when she was thought to be at death's door, the little saint of Lourdes, strong stock of the Pyrenees, gave up her body to Jesus and Mary on April 16th, 1879. She had fought the good battle. She was being called home. Mary had told her, "I can't promise you happiness in this world, but in the next." It was time for the next world. The process of beatification was opened in 1908, 3 weeks after Mother Vazou died. 25 years later, and less than 60 years after her death, On December the 8th, 1933, Bernadette was raised to the communion of saints to be called for all time Saint Bernadette.
But that's not the end of the story. In 1909, 30 years after Bernadette died, upon investigating, and it was not only the members of the church, which are the strictest, civil and religious authorities, observed that the body was completely intact. On 18th of April 1925, the body of Bernadette was transferred to the chapel of St. Helen, where we're going to go, inside the convent. And since the 3rd of August 1925, it rests in the chapel.
And it's in a glass case, and you'll see the body. The body is more beautiful in death than she was alive. Remember, there is a wax covering over the face and the hands, but her body is just beautiful.
Did Bernadette's sanctification come from those 8 years of fame or from the 13 years of obscurity? Was her fiat, her yes to Jesus and Mary, one that we can imitate? Is Bernadette a role model that touches your heart? Pray on it.
Bernadette, you became little so that the message of Our Lady would become large, and it has grown and grown and grown, and is important again today. I am the Immaculate Conception. We love you, family.
Write us at the address on our screen or call us in the United States at 1-800-633-2484.
We love you.